Hi guys, my name is Peter and welcome to a brand new video. So in this video, I'm going to talk about XML/HTTP request. So basically, XML/HTTP request is a way in which you can communicate with the server. It is how we can send an HTTP request to a server. You can send and receive data from an API, and in all these kind of scenarios, we basically make use of HTML/HTTP request or any sort of other methods. And talking about other methods, XML/HTTP request and fetch APIs are built into the browser. So you need not import any package or do any sort of things like that. And you can also use a third-party library like Axios to do the same as well. But in this video, we are going to talk about XML/HTTP request. So if you take a look at the screen, this is basically a advice generating web application. So the functionality of this particular web application is that whenever I click on this particular button right here, a new advice is to be generated. So that updates this particular code as well as the corresponding advice ID right here. So this is what we are going to build in this particular video. So now let's take a look at a completed product. So here you can see that this is a completed product. So whenever I click on this particular button, you can see that a new code has been generated. So it updates the code as well as the corresponding ID. So this is what we are going to build in this particular video. So whenever I click on this particular button, a request is sent to an API. So the API sends back the data and we basically update a web page. So this is the overall functionality that we are going to implement. So without wasting any more time, let's get started. So guys, first of all, let me give you guys a basic code structure. So I won't be talking about the CSS or the HTML part in this particular video, and we will be focusing on the JavaScript part itself. So to make things more clear, I'm gonna just explain the code structure. So we have got a division which is named as container, which wraps the entire element. So the container division wraps this particular entire element. So first of all, we have got the advice ID, which is wrapped around a division named as advice number. Then we have got another division named as code, which basically holds this particular code right here. And the code is basically inserted in an h2 tag. And after that, we have got a simple division named as divider, which holds an image, which is this particular divider right here. And finally, we have got the button, which is wrapped inside another division named as button. So the use case that we want to satisfy is that whenever we click on this particular button, we need to send a request to an API, we need to receive the data, and we need to populate that data in this particular code as well as in this particular advice ID. So the first thing that we are going to do is that we are going to add an event listener to this particular button. So let's basically copy the name of this particular class in which the button image is located. And let's basically select the element first. So I'm going to get the element by its class name, and let's specify the name of the button. So the next thing that we need to do is that we need to add an event listener. So since we have selected our button by using class name, it's gonna basically return a collection. So I'm gonna point to the first index, advice button, and I'm gonna point to the first index of it. And we are gonna add an event listener. So the event listener type is gonna be a click event listener. And once we click on this particular button, we are gonna call a function. Alright, now in this particular function, we are gonna set up our XML/HTTP request. So the first thing that we are gonna do is that we are gonna create an object for our XML/HTTP. So to do that, I'm gonna create another XHR variable, which is gonna create a new object for XML/HTTP request. XML/HTTP request. Alright, now by using this particular XHR object, we can access all the methods of XML/HTTP request. So the first thing that we are going to do is that we are going to use the open method. So the XHR open method is going to prepare a request to be sent. It will not send the request, but it's going to prepare the request to be sent. So it basically takes in two parameters. That is, the first one is the HTTP method. It can be either a get method or a post method. So we are requesting data from the API. So we are going to use the get method. And the second parameter that we need to specify is the URL. As you can see, we have specified the method first of all, then we need to specify the URL to which the request is to be made. So to get the URL, let's go to our APIs page, and the advice slip JSON API is what we are requesting the advice from. So here you can see that for HTTP get method, we can use this particular URL. So I'm going to copy this particular URL from here and let's basically paste it here. All right. Now to send the request, you can use xhr.send, and this is where the request is going to be sent. Now let's see what is basically happening in the backend when we click on the button. So let me open up the developer tool and let's go to the network section right here, and I'm going to select the XHR request option right here. So the moment I click on this particular button, you can see that an advice request has been sent. So if I click on it, here you can see that the request has been sent to this particular URL. The request method is get, and the status is 200, which means that the request was successful. Now, if I click on the preview button here, you can see that this is the data that we have received in response. So we have got our advice as well as the ID. So now this particular data is no use for us because we cannot manipulate the data. We should alter the data in a way that we can use it. So to do that, let's basically use another method which is known as the onload method. So onload method is pretty similar to that of the load method that we use in event listener. So let's enter xhr.onload. So this particular onload method will be triggered the moment when we receive data in response from the API. So this is going to be equated to a function which is basically an arrow function. So guys, in this particular function, we need to satisfy two different conditions. So the first condition is that we have requested data and we have successfully received the data in response to a request. And the second condition is that we have requested data, but we haven't received the data. That is, our request was unsuccessful. So if you remember previously, I have shown you guys that we have received a status, that is a response status of 200, which means that our request was successful. So we are going to use that particular condition, that is if xhr.status, if it is equal to 200, which means that our request is successful. So for understanding, I'm going to simply console.log our response. To basically get a response, we are going to use xhr.response, and the else condition, that is if our request is unsuccessful, I'm going to simply log our status. Now let's save it and let's run our code here. So if I click on this particular button, you can see that we have received our data successfully, and I'm going to simply change our URL. That is, I'm going to remove an E from the end. Then I'm going to click on the button again, and here you can see that we have got an error 404, which means that the page can't be accessible or the page doesn't exist. So these are the two conditions that we have to satisfy. Now let's come back. So if you notice, we have actually received the data in the form of JSON, but we are going to convert it into JavaScript object. So to do that, we are going to use json.parse. So right here, I'm going to create an variable known as JSON, and here I'm going to enter json.parse, and onto json.parse we pass our response, which is basically xhr.response. Now if I simply console.log our JSON, and if I click on the button, here you can see that now we basically receive a JavaScript object. So here you can see the advice, the ID, as well as the slip. So for example, if I want to access just the advice, I can access it via json.slip.advice. Let me show you that. So let us log json.slip.advice. Now if I save it and if I click on the button, here you can see we have received just our advice. So this is how we can populate the data. So now we have basically done the parsing part. Now it is time for us to update our web page. That is, we need to update our code as well as this particular ID. So to do that, we need to first of all select these two particular elements. So if you go to our index file, you can see that for our advice number, we have got a p tag, which also has an ID named as code.id. And for our code, which is basically inside an h2 tag, we again has got an ID which is named as new code. Now let's select these two. So first of all, let's select our advice number. So I'm going to copy the ID right here, So let us name it as court ID, which is equal to document dot get element by ID, and I'm gonna pass in the ID right here, and I'm gonna do the same for our court data, which is equal to document dot get element by ID, and let us copy the ID from our index file and let us basically paste it. So I have already shown you guys how we can select individual data from our JavaScript object. So let me just delete this particular logging part, and we are going to create two variables to store the ID as well as the code. The first one is basically our new code ID, which is gonna be json.slip.id, and the second one is our code data itself, that is new code data, which is gonna be json dot slip dot advice. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create another function, and I'm going to pass these two data as an parameter, and we will update our web page in this particular external function. So our code is kind of more clean. So the name of the function is going to be inject data. We haven't created this particular function yet, and we will be passing these two parameters in this particular function. Alright, now let's copy the name of the function, and we can create it right over here. Sorry. And we're going to use the same name in this particular function as well. Alright, now we have created the function, and the next task that we have got is to update our web page. So the first thing that we are going to update is basically our ID right here. So we have already selected the ID here, and let's select the name, and we are going to alter the inner text. So the way in which I'm going to do is that we will be using tilde. So if you see our index file, the format is advice hashtag as well as the advice ID. So the only thing that we need to change is the number here. So let us basically copy this particular word from here and paste it inside our tilde, and what we need to update is just the number. So I'm gonna delete the number, and I'm gonna type in a dollar followed by curly bracket. So we have got our ID right here in our new code ID. So I'm gonna copy this new code ID from here, and I'm gonna paste it right over here, and I'm gonna do the exact same thing for our code as well. That is, we're gonna select our code data from here, and we will be altering our inner text. Let's enter tilde. So if you can see, the entire quote is enclosed in a single quotes. So let's basically enter a single quote here, and inside that quote we are gonna enter dollar followed by curly brackets, and we already have got our quote in this particular variable named as new quote data, which we have passed as an argument to this particular function. So let's select that and paste it right over here. Now let's save it. Now let's see if things are gonna work or not. So now when I click on the button, you can see that we have got a new quote as well as a new quote ID, and our application is working perfectly fine. So for example, if I remove an E from here, and if I kind of run it, nothing is going to happen. It's going to run the default or hard-coded code, which I have already done over here, the hard-coded one. But let's actually show a warning. So I'm going to show a warning right here on the advice ID. So it's pretty easy. Let's delete it. Let's select our code ID dot inner text, and let's basically add a tilde and say oops, and inside the dollar we are going to specify our xhr dot status. So for example, now if I click on the button again, it's going to show oops for not for, and if I add an E over here, save it, run it, it's going to work perfectly fine. So that's it guys, thanks a lot for watching, and I really hope that you got a basic idea regarding XMLHTTP request, how we can request to an API, receive data and populate that data onto your website. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video. Until then, bye.